Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another instalment of ARA's webinar presentation series. I'm Robert Wilson, General Manager for Workforce Development here at the ARA. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr Polly McGee, who's going to present to us. Polly is an author, leadership facilitator, and program designer and disruptor for good. With over a decade working in innovation and commercialisation, leadership program design and delivery in public, university and private sector roles, Polly has a strong background in combining coaching, facilitating, teaching, curriculum design and content authoring with the search for meaning and purpose. Polly is one of only 400 selected to be globally trained by Dr Brené Brown in her Dare to Lead certified program facilitation, which Polly has now delivered across Australia. Polly is the designer and facilitator of the ARA Future Leaders National Program, now in its third year. Today, Polly will be speaking to us about Build Your Resilience to Thrive and Thrive, and it will be about resilience in the face of change, fear or loss. This webinar will give you the tools to use at work and in life so you can survive and thrive no matter what is going on around you. We will have plenty of time at the end of Polly's presentation for Q&A, so please post your questions throughout the presentation and I will facilitate these at the end of Polly's presentation. Please note that you can submit questions via the question pane in your attendee control panel to the right of your screen. This presentation is also being recorded and a link will be shared with you in the coming days. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Polly McGee to present to us today.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's really lovely to be back with the ARA family and the broader RAL family. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land wherever you're sitting today and welcome all of you to this webinar on becoming resilient and having a discussion and a conversation together about tools to help us survive and thrive. Before we start, we're going to practice the first step of resilience, which is we're just going to take a moment to just fully be present. Everyone's come in from their various activities this morning, and so I want you to just, wherever you are now, just sit and really feel your body in the chair or standing up or sitting on the ground or however you're approaching this webinar today. I want you to take a big lift of your shoulders, stretch them right up, stretch them back and just drop them down. Move your head around, get some spaciousness in your neck, side to side, and then reset yourself. I want you to take a really big, deep breath through the nose, through your nostrils, all the way down into your diaphragm as far as you can go. Just extend your belly, feel it in your chest. Hold it for a couple of seconds, and then I want you to breathe out through your mouth. And breathe out as fully as you possibly can, so you feel like you're a completely deflated diaphragm of a balloon. All right, well, let's do that again. Really big nostril breath. Feel it going all the way down, your ribs stretching out, your stomach stretching out, every part of you being filled with breath. Hold it, and now release that. Just take a moment. You're here. We've got a beautiful hour together with plenty of content and hopefully a really robust question and answer session at the end. So thank you again for joining me. What we've just done there is the first step to resilience. And if I can give you the spoiler alert for this whole webinar, resilience is about being able to stay present and manage reaction. When we breathe, it's a way of regulating our nervous system. And one of the things that keeps us feeling resilient or keeps giving us the capacity to be resilient is to be able to calm down our sympathetic nervous system when it's in overdrive and we're really heightened, and to be able to bring in our parasympathetic nervous system to give us all of the cues that we aren't in danger. We don't need fight, flight or freeze. We just need to calm right down and be able to deal with what's in front of us. I will encourage you to practice breathing, and we've got this hour where you've hopefully carved out the time just to be here on this webinar. So take that time that you remind yourself to breathe and remind yourself what it feels like to take a really full breath. If you're really stressed and if you're working really hard or you're in any kind of a situation where you're really under the pump, we have a real tendency to shallow breathe just into the top of our lungs. When we do that, we really reduce the amount of oxygen that's available to us, which reduces the amount of capacity our brains have to really, truly function in their executive functions and make good, clear, calm decisions. When we shallow breathe, we amp it up straight into fight or flight, and from there, no good can come. So throughout this hour, we'll do a bit of breathing, and I'll give you some more tips at the end. So resilience, I feel, is a word that we're all sort of familiar with. We've heard it constantly, particularly during the pandemic. And I want to take a moment to really shout out to all the Victorians who are on the line in the webinar today. I really acknowledge the additional stress that you guys are having with the lockdown at the moment. So breathing, it's amazing for you. But I think we're all in a current environment where we have a contagion of stress, and we have a contagion of fear, we have a contagion of anxiety. If we're watching the news, if we're listening to podcasts, if we're just sort of seeing what's happening in this constantly changing environment, we're being really asked to be the most resilient we've ever been. So we tend to be talking about resilience a lot. But I'm not sure all of us really understand what resilience is. And I don't know that we understand how to apply it to our lives. So we're going to today go through an understanding of what resilience is. And we're going to start here, which is with a definition of resilience. The key parts of this is that resilience is the capacity to bounce back. It's the capacity to suffer in some way, a defeat, a loss, anything that might happen to you, but you can bounce back from it. And the quality of your resilience is the quality of how quickly it takes you to recover. So resilience naturally in and of itself pre-assumes that you need to be in some kind of a situation which is causing you to have stress and pain. So you're going to have to suffer. And I guess this is the human condition. So all of us, there won't be a single person on this webinar who hasn't at some point in their life experienced pain and hardship and stress and difficulty and distress. So those of us who have had a higher quotient than some others, they may well be ones who can be more resilient because you understand the feeling of what it is to get knocked off your socks and have to come back. So resilience isn't fun, and it's not easy and painless. And resilience isn't something that just sits on the top of a perfect life. The capacity and the quality of resilience is something that is born through hardship and born through moving through that hardship and be able to get back into what is, how I would describe it, your true nature of self. So who gets to be resilient? I feel like often we think there is a person who is really resilient, and we see heroic people on the news or stories of people who come back from just incredible adversity. And often, you'll sit there and think, how could they even survive that? How could they even get back up from that? And I think about people like Rosie Batty and just the amazing work that they do out in the world, given the stress and distress that she's been through. But what we know about resilience from research, and there's a lot of research that's been done on resilience because it's something that has been identified as one of the key tenets of living a life that is full of joy and full of purpose and also full of productivity. The research has shown that resilience is available to all of us, and that people, and we're all people, we all can demonstrate resilience. So there's not a particular genetic strain, and there's not a particular type of person who has these skills. We can all do it. And that's a really good and positive thing to know. Backing that up is that resilience is not innate, it's a habit. So the fact that we can all do it is one thing, but we can all do a lot of things, and we all don't do them. I've been reading a fantastic book called Awake by Anthony DeMello. And basically what he says is that if we want to get awareness and if we want to come into the world, we actually have to want to wake up from the patterns of things that we're doing that are unhelpful to us. But of course, most of us have an awareness, but we just don't have the drive to do something about it. So resilience can be developed, but it needs to be a set of habits and it needs to be a practice. And you need to do it all the time, which means you also need an appetite for courage and an appetite for knowing that the more resilient you want to be and the more courageous you want to be, the more you're likely to have to really put yourself out there and take a few hits. Now, for those of you who've been with me through the Dare to Lead series that we did with the ARA webinars, you'll be really familiar with that idea of vulnerability and courage and how that all works together. And resilience is a really key part of that. All of these things work in lockstep together. So we're going to talk about 6 tools, I'll call them, today, which are these things and how to use them to be able to become more resilient. But the caveat right here is that all of these are practices and they're all habits, and you need to really use them and do more than just hear them on the webinar and understand them. They actually have to be put into action. You have to have that wisdom in your body. It's not knowledge that sits in your head, it's knowledge and wisdom that sits in your bones. And I want to just make a point here about what we think resilience is, because I think resilience is often imagined to be toughness, some sort of actual physical strength that, you know, the stronger you are, the harder you are, you can push on through, you can go it alone, all of that stuff that we really associate with just stoicism. That's not resilience. That might be the armor that allows you to get through really difficult situations, but it is armor that has its own UXB planted underneath it, because the stress and the trauma that you're holding in your body by going through life in that way will always present itself at some point. That doesn't go away. It just sits in the nervous system, cruising around, waiting for a moment to strike. If we think about what being strong is in the way that we might imagine it, so that we're muscled or we're armored or we're rigid or we're blocked, that is a presentation of strength. But what it also is fixed and rigid. What resilience asks of us isn't that we need to be a massively strong block that can't ever be broken, that can't be penetrated. What resilience asks of us is that we're agile. And it asks of us that we are able to move and bend and be flexible. And if you think about that definition, that resilience is the capacity to bounce back. If you think of things like Ayers Rock or, you know, a giant train, anything that's massive, hard, and solid, those are not things which move. And you can't be resilient and be fixed. You can't be resilient and be stuck in the one place, because the world is changing all around us. And what we've certainly seen in COVID is things we would have never imagined possible in a million years, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our communities. We've been all asked to overnight transform and be able to do that. And that has been something which, for people who are quite resilient, they've had the agility and the mindset to be able to do. For those that aren't, it's been much harder and much more painful. So if you think that resilience is strength, it's a type of strength, but it's the strength that comes from being courageous and vulnerable. All right, let's get habit forming. So the first part of the tool set of becoming resilient is having an agile laser focus. One of the great things about resilience is that it has a really, in my opinion, it has a really strong connection with the traits of people who are sort of very entrepreneurial. It works really well when you are able to move nimbly and agilely in your present situation, but you're really super clear on your macro goal. What I know from working with startups for a decade and having spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs is that the ability to have a goal of achievement, what you want to do in a really clear sense over the horizon that you are absolutely laser focused on, is a hallmark of those people. But as things happen, as they do in startups and as they do right now in our lives every day, we need to be super agile, because things are changing so fast. One day you're in an office, the next day you're working from home, the next day you're locked in your house. And so we can't cling to anything that's in the present. We just have to be able to move and flow and recalibrate back to where our big goal is. So it's helpful to do that when you know what your baseline is, or when you know what that macro goal is. And the thing is, that macro goal is generally not about a job title or delivering a project or something that is tangible and mechanical. The macro goal is much more around what's being driven by your values and your purpose. If you're really clear on what you want to achieve in your life in the long game, then the short game is much easier to be able to be really flexible with. So having a clear idea of who you are, what's important to you, what values drive you. And again, for those who did, I think, webinar 1 of the ARA series on Dare to Lead, we talked a lot about values, and I'm sure that you can go back and revisit that. So understanding values and purpose helps you to be really clear that the mechanics of how things happen, not super important. Being able to stay within your values, being able to stay within your integrity and your purpose, and seeing what's over the horizon, that's what's important. You need to keep a really loose grip, because when things change, when you're really holding onto them tightly, it stops you being able to be agile. And you also really cling to a belief of what something should be. So we need to think about the bounce here. It's really important. I want to just unpack for a minute what it is to sort of get fixed on this is the way we do things. It's quite common and it's quite human to just want something that feels like it's permanent and secure. Very few things in life, in fact, I would go out on a limb and say nothing in life is permanent and secure. But as humans, we like to think that, we're solid. Here's a phone, here's a computer, here's a desk, here's a job, here's an identity, and it's all really clear for us. So when those things get moved around, we really don't like it. And it pushes us into that place where we become really activated, our sympathetic nervous system's going crazy, and we're in fight or flight. We're very animal in our behavior. So if we've decided this is how we're doing a project, or this is how this day is going to pan out, and this is how this appointment's going to go, when it doesn't happen, it tends to make us really uncomfortable and really want to cling on to that. So our energy goes into making it back to what we thought was going to happen. Now, the point about this is what we thought was going to happen is a story. It's fiction. It might have had a resonance with something that had happened previously, but we can't say for sure that's what's going to happen. But in our mind, we've told ourselves the story, that's what's going to happen. And so our belief is that's what's going to happen. We've told ourselves the outcome of that will be in the future, and we've created a fantasy or we've created a story around what that future is going to look like. So when that doesn't happen, we're clinging even more, trying to pull everything back, the pieces back into the picture that we created for ourselves. So just be really clear what the agile laser focus is about, is really understanding where you want to get to, how you want to feel, how you want to live your life, how you want to experience the world in every part of your life. It's not just work or life in separate places. They're all together, particularly for people who are locked in their houses and experiencing life and work all together. So keep a loose grip. You've got to remain agile and you've got to remain curious. Part of the way to do that, and I mean, that's a big thing to think about. I'm not suggesting everyone's going to be able to just quickly move to the idea of impermanence, and no, it's really easy. Everything changes, but it does. So if we practice perspective taking, it helps us to become agile. This too will pass is a really well-known phrase, but it's a really convenient one for you to tuck in your pocket on days when everything is going so cray and you just don't feel like you've got the capacity to rise up and do this again. Knowing that this is going to pass and it's a moment versus it's going to feel like this for the rest of your life is a really important part of perspective taking. I've talked about the big picture and the long-term goals. So really be clear on what that big picture is. Understand why you are where you are and what that was leading to, but be prepared to let the ground move under you if necessary. Identify the truths of your situation. And again, this is a really important thing for us to be able to do as humans, because we're really good at thinking about the thing that we thought was going to happen as the truth, or the thing that we had happened before. So it's always going to be like that, and that being the truth. The truths are things which you can absolutely 100% say are fact. Now, interestingly, mostly the things which are truths are the things which you feel, because it's your particular experience. So you need to think about what you're believing and what you are feeling and being able to put that into context. So if I was to sort of have, let's say there's a meeting that's been called, I've got a project I need to deliver on, and I'm just absolutely sweating on this meeting to get things done, meeting gets cancelled. If I'm saying things like, you let me down, you're really unreliable, I need this to happen, none of those are truths. All of those are things which are opinions. The only truth of that situation is I feel upset about it, or I feel uncomfortable, or I feel frightened because I'm not going to be able to deliver my project. So really identify the truth of the situation in the perspective. Don't put it over there, bring it back in and make it about what is your capacity to deal with this, what is your capacity to respond, and what is your accountability for how you're feeling right now. We've talked about how holding on limits your capacity to recover. And as I said previously, it does that because the energy is all going into something that never existed. By getting curious and welcoming the unknown, you're really in a position where you're shifting from a fixed mindset, this is how it's going to be, this is my expectation, to a growth mindset. I welcome change. I'm curious about what comes next. I want this to be really hard and I want it to be a challenge. So when we have the welcoming of the unknown, we don't mind what happens because we know that something else is going to fill that void. That's laws of nature, and we'll be able to get things done, and we have to look for different ways to do it. And it really encourages us to stretch ourselves out of our comfort zone. Being resilient is also having a real appetite for being able to sit in the discomfort without doubt. We need to be really comfortable with just what is it that's going on? We don't know. And that feels uncomfortable because it brings up all the things in us as humans that we hate. We don't like discomfort. We like certainty. We like fixed and permanent things, all of the things which we aren't. And so being resilient is asking us to be able to just surrender and let that go. Along the way, though, one of the really key hallmarks of people who are resilient, aside from having a loose grip and being able to rumble and bounce back, is a sense of celebration and gratitude. Resilience asks us to celebrate all the small things. And right now, where it feels like we're looking down this endless tunnel of lack and having all of the things that we've celebrated and known all our lives taken away from us, now is the time to really celebrate the small things, all the wins. So when you get anything done, you've got to acknowledge that to yourself and to others. And it's important to really acknowledge what you're doing in that, celebrating who you are. It's almost un-Australian. We're really all about the mates over there. Don't blow your own trumpet. But I really encourage you to celebrate you and to celebrate what you're doing, what your team's doing, and create a culture of that in your workplace and also in your life, with your friends, with your family. It's a sweet way to be. And gratitude is shown to be one of the key planks for people who are super resilient. They're grateful. They understand that they're celebrating what's right now in front of them, not what went before or what's coming. Often those celebrations get really eclipsed by the sort of failures or setbacks or the big challenges that we're facing. So it's hard to be able to celebrate something really small, like just ticking off one milestone in a project, when you feel like there's so much more coming down the line, particularly when it's really unknown. So don't allow those beautiful small moments of joy to be eclipsed by failure or setback or moving straight on to the next thing. Take the time to really be present to what good's happened. The only way that we're going to be able to really able to be super resilient is when we learn individually, in our teams, in our workplaces, our cultures, and in our broader community to celebrate failure and to understand the importance of failure. It's not something that we do particularly well in this country, in this culture. We're really big on success and we're really big on mateship, but we aren't so big on failure because we don't know how to deal with it. When you look at the business culture, say, of somewhere like the US, they have a much more failure-oriented culture because they have a lot of funding that's tied to people showing that they are resilient. If you're an entrepreneur, again, in that startup space, but it's true for many industries in the US, they celebrate the failure because they know that that means that you are going to be stronger and able to deal with what comes. Often what happens with failure is there's a scramble to pass the buck and to make it someone else's fault. We want to find someone to lay blame on when there's failure. But rarely, and I mean really rarely, is failure ever on the shoulders of one individual. It's always an ecosystem of people who didn't and shouldn't and couldn't and wouldn't and forgot or didn't see what was happening. And I really like to take the approach that any failure is a failure for everyone to embrace and for everyone to learn from. No, cultures of shaming and blaming, they don't allow failure to flourish, and then they don't allow innovation to flourish. So the only way that we're able to get innovative, and if we ever needed to be innovative, we need it now, is to have a culture where people can put forward all the ideas, they can try things in a controlled way. And again, I'm not talking about catastrophic failure. I'm not talking about systemic failure. I'm talking about individual failure and failure of idea. And you want to leverage learning and you want to share. We tend to say yes to a lot of stuff, particularly now where we're quite dislocated from our colleagues and everyone's putting in 1,000,000%. So we need to be able to set clear boundaries, and we need to be able to say, this is what's okay for me and this is what's not okay for me. We also need vulnerability and courage, and these are two things which I think we can't have enough discussion about in this world that we're in. Vulnerability and courage are in lockstep, they're hand in hand, and they're mandatory to resilience. So you can't be resilient really unless you know how to fail and get up again. So you can't avoid pain. You can't be resilient if you aren't ever in the firing line. So you need to have courage, and it's a really important and integral part of the process. Vulnerability is a difficult and contested understanding for most people because it feels like it's exposure and it feels like we are weak when we're vulnerable. But when we're vulnerable, what we're actually doing is opening ourselves up to connect with other humans. Connection is such an absolutely fundamental part of who we are. We are hardwired as human animals to be connected with each other, connected with our tribes, connected with our community. And so to do that, we have to reach out and we have to be vulnerable, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. I think it particularly takes a lot of courage to do that for many men who are raised so much to be strong and to not show weakness. And it's an absolute myth for vulnerability that that vulnerability is weakness. In the case of resilience, vulnerability is the glue that holds it all together. Vulnerability is the strength that allows us to bend and that allows us to not break when things get really tough. This is a really key one in asking for what you need, which is that you can't go it alone. There's been quite a lot of research, as I said, done on resilience from many different areas, but one of the pieces that Brené Brown did, whose work, of course, I'm really familiar with, was to look at what some of the sort of key tenets of really vulnerable CEOs were. She did a really big study of that. And one of the things that came out of it was that they're frightened all the time, that they have to be really courageous. And Brené really sort of pushed that and sort of said, but you know, you're the CEO, you're leading this organization, how can you be frightened? And they're like, oh yeah, every day full of fear, but we just keep on going. So fear is really critical. The other thing that was so important in the people who were resistant, or who were resistant to failure and to the problems of that, but also were really strong when it came to resilience, was that they asked for help and that they were able to, I guess, show their vulnerability as well, but they didn't feel they had to go it alone. So one of the sort of key things that came out of that for her is that those people who were most valued across sort of sitting there hoarding all of their feelings, and that were able to get support from a range of different people. So this is something, if you want to be resilient, and particularly if you're feeling all the feels right now and really feeling that you're not as resilient as you'd like to be, you cannot go it alone. One of the other myths of vulnerability is that vulnerability is, a solo sport. It's not. Vulnerability is a team sport. So you need to be able to reach out to a coach, to a mentor, to a friend, to your direct report, whoever it is. You need to be able to talk to someone about how you're feeling and ask for what you need. And know that you can do that in a place that is free from judgment and that's free from shame, so that whatever help you need, you can ask for it. This, again, because it's so tied with vulnerability, it's a really difficult place for a lot of us to go to. But it's really helpful to have someone to take all of that stuff that's going on in your head 24/7 out and into a place where you can see what parts of it are storytelling, what parts of it are historical, what parts of it are trauma, and what parts of it are the things that you can then productively use and work on and take in curiosity and work with. So not going alone is such a key message about resilience for me. And I really see it. The people that are able to bounce back, they don't bounce back alone. They bounce back in community, and they bounce back knowing that it's okay to take a fall, but it's also okay to ask for help to get up again. The laws of physics, much easier when you've got others leveraging you than when you're staying there. So be really clear that this is the time, if ever there was a time, for you to be able to practice your vulnerability muscles and your courage muscles and ask for help. And this is one of the things that will stand you in really good stead, because the reality is that all of us are suffering. All of us are going through these experiences that are helping to build our resilience. But when we don't have anything but our own echo chambers, that's when we start to get into real trouble. And I know for the people that I know that are in Melbourne who are in deep lockdown and have been for weeks now, they're starting to really feel very tested by their environment. And more than ever, they're starting to feel those wobbles. And so I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing an increasing amount in my work of people who are reaching out to me for coaching and for mentoring that I would normally not see come through my door. So you can't underestimate the personal experience, but you also can't underestimate the context that's happening at the moment. As I said at the beginning, we are in a contagion of anxiety at the moment because no one knows what's happening. And so when all we're getting is messages reinforcing the fear, it's really understandable that a lot of us are feeling very, very low on the resilience front at the moment. So if that applies to you, then reach out and ask for help. It is the best thing that you can possibly do. Now, I just realized that I skipped a slide, which I'm going to go back to here. Another one of the tools, and it's actually a really critical one, is the capacity to embrace emotion. So that kind of fits nicely with that slide that we just went through. What we have as people who are resilient is exposure to things like stress, anxiety, grief or heartache, shame and fear and anger. None of us like to talk about those things. They all feel really awful, and they all feel like something that we just want to clamp down and keep deep within. But these are the feelings that resilience is built on. And what we need to do is we have to recognize these emotions. You may have thought that the tools of resilience for survival and thrival was going to be all about good old tools to be able to use that were much more tangible. These are things that are essential to what we're doing, and these are the tools of resilience. But they're very soft and feeling based. And surprise, surprise, that's because resilience happens in our bodies. It happens in our capacity to respond. And when I say it happens in our bodies, I don't mean it happens in our bodies in an exercise way, although of course, strength and fitness, really helpful for your mental wellness. What happens is that so much of this stuff is driven by emotion, and it's driven by the way we react. So when we are in a place where we need to be resilient, we have to recognize emotion. We have to recognize it as a felt sense, not intellectually. We have to recognize that to be able to move through any really significant setback, that we have to be able to release that stress, trauma, anxiety, fear, anger from our bodies and be able to move through. When we opened the session and we did our breath, what I was talking about was how you regulate your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems. These are really driven by emotion, but they're driven by emotional response. They're driven by a physical response in the body. Those residues get trapped in the body if we don't release them, but we're all trained to just like shut it all down and just keep on going. When we don't recognize it and move it on through, it gets us into lots of physical and mental difficulty later in life. And they've shown that with certain cases of PTSD and trauma, that often the body doesn't release those stresses many years after an incident might have happened. The way that we move those stress hormones out of the body is on the breath, which is why breathing is so important. And most people don't really have a clear understanding of that. So cortisol is released through the breath. 80% of those hormones are released on the breath, which is why a nose breath in to start to bring down, or to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, and a strong breath out releases those stored residues to help us recover. When an animal has an accident, say it's a kangaroo that gets tweaked by a car on the way in to work, there's many of them in Canberra for sure. For those who are there, and for us in Tassie, we've got little critters everywhere. So when those animals have a little bingle, if they're alive, they don't sort of just like get up and make sure no one saw them and they weren't embarrassed and then just walk away. What they do is they have a little shake. They shake it out of their muscles. This is the physical release of the trauma residues. We don't do that. We just kind of stoic it on. So no stoicism. One of the key things as a tool you can use for resilience is feel things in your body, acknowledge you're having an emotional response, and breathe it out, shout it out, go and have a run, go and have a walk, move it out. So one of the key tools for you is recognizing that emotion is an integral part of the resilience process and not just locking it all down. Growth mindset is one of your other tools, and it's a really important one. All these 6 tools work together. So you'll see that there's a link between each of them. Growth mindset is super strongly correlated with resilience, and because people who are resilient are able to look for the curiosity and the wonder and the interest in every situation, not just in situations that we think are good. Growth mindset says that setbacks are a normal and a desirable part of learning, that you're looking for difficulties to come along so you can solve problems more fully, and the next problem, and the next problem, and that you're encouraging that. So in a world where if resilience is made up of having to deal with problems and solve them and then recognize the emotion, respond and get back up, growth mindset is really helpful because nothing stops you in your tracks completely. You understand that it is a normal and natural part of life, and it's an exciting part of growing and knowing. So you want to seek things out with what I'm calling a non-binary vigor. So let me unpack that for you. For those of you who need to breathe, have a breath now. Non-binary vigor, take a while. So non-binary vigor is basically that we tend to live in a world where we categorize things. We love boxes. Things are good or they're bad. They're nice or they're nasty. They're tasty or they're disgusting. We like things that are really binary. That way, because we are so hardwired to behave like that, we tend to keen towards things which are good and we tend to eschew things that are bad. What that means is that our preferences really don't allow us to look at everything as a learning experience and not preference or privilege certain experiences over others. So falling down and, scraping your knee, that would be seen as something that's bad. But we need to say, that's just an experience. I can see myself healing. What can I do if I did it when I'm running? What can I do in my gait to make my gait better? How can I be more present when I'm active so I don't fall over? We just need to see it as an opportunity for learning, not an opportunity for going into a fixed place and not ever wanting that to happen again. So we need a curiosity with an appetite for experience. So rather than thinking this situation's good, this situation's bad, this person's good, this person's bad, we need to try and move our mindset into a place where we are just observers and we're curious and we want to know why things happened, why behaviors happened, why we are who we are, rather than just trying to categorize everything and put it away. So curiosity is really important, and the appetite for experience, particularly experience in the unknown. When we're frightened of the unknown or where we're resistant to the unknown and our preference is to have things which we know, which we can understand the outcomes, how they're going to impact us, it allows us to feel safer and more secure. But it doesn't help us to grow, and it really doesn't help us to become resilient. If we spend all our time getting stuck in, why did that happen to me? How could this be my experience? I'm a good person, whatever it is. We just stay in victim and we stay in collapse, and it doesn't allow us to just think, actually, things happen to everyone. Not bad things, not good things, but things happen to everyone. And this is what's happening to me right now. So how do I stay present and how do I solve the problem one little win at a time? So really stimulating your appetite for curiosity is going to help you be so much more resilient. If you have got questions that have bubbled up throughout this time, I want you to pop them into the question box now. Robert is raring to go, I'm sure, to find out what's been asked throughout this time, and I'm really raring to unpack anything that I've said. So please send your questions through now. We're going to have plenty of time to deal with them. So let's get them in the box. And of course, take a breath. Always taking a breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The resilience is possibly very different to what you might have thought it was in terms of what it is and how we best bring it all together. It certainly is being present. If you aren't caught in the past, anticipating the future, creating anxiety with both of those actions, because they're the things which throw us into anxiety. If you can actually develop the muscle of being present, you deal with what is in front of you. Now, that doesn't mean you can't plan for anything, and it doesn't mean that you can't make appointments or have meetings or think about a future where we can maybe get on an airplane. what it means is that we aren't tied to those outcomes as fixed outcomes. We can be present, we can book a holiday, and we can be really flexible when it doesn't all come off. So understanding how to be present, it's probably the most difficult thing to ask the human brain to do. And so for those of you who meditate, or for those of you who have any kind of a practice of mindfulness, two other words which you often hear used in conjunction with resilience, because they ask you to come into the present and they ask you to be here and witness what's right in front of you, without storytelling, without judgment, without categorization. Now, I can tell you that it takes the majority of all day, every day of my life to try and get my brain to go back into that shape. But it's a practice and it's a habit that I'm willing to work on and invest time in, because I know that it's a habit that's going to keep me resilient and able to really move quickly through this really challenging world that we're living in right now. Challenging to us, keening and yearning for a nostalgic time where things didn't feel like they were quite so complicated as they are now. Resilience is releasing expectations of ourselves, of situations, of each other, of the things that we think we know as fact and truth that we want to cling on to, that have been, part of our mindset. We have to be able to release those expectations. When we release an expectation, we invite ourselves to be thrilled by what happens, because we don't know. So it's going to be surprising. We might be incredibly surprised by the way people react, by the things that happen in our workplaces. And we might be able to have a whole heap of joy around what's going on. So by being able to release expectations with a growth mindset, look to the future with, curiosity, but look to the present with resolution, that really helps us. Not knowing all the answers is amazing for resilience. And again, it feeds back into this idea that if we think we know the answers, that really pulls us back into fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is that what we know is right and that we want to do it in that particular way, and there is no room for any other viewpoint or any other way of doing things. A lot of this happens really unconsciously. We know how to do things. We've done it all before. We're not really looking for the curious. We're not really looking for the unknown. So by being able to release not knowing all the answers to, I'm not sure, I don't know, let's investigate, I'm curious about, being able to go into situations in a team sense, being able to do it together and explore and find answers as a group, that is a really strong part of being able to be resilient, particularly in the workplace, where you need to bring everyone on this journey with you, and you need to be able to be modeling that behavior so others can also feel free to grow their resilience muscles as well. Knowing how to breathe. I bang on a lot about breathing, and it's sometimes I feel like it seems very incongruous in a lot of the different places I can manage to squeeze it into, but I see it as such an important part of how we actually operate in the world in everyday life. And the majority of times when I'm working with people and coaching them who are having a really difficult time, and I stop them and we ask them to breathe, what I see is a really super high chest breath, and I hear them talk about that they have felt like this since they've been stressed and they can't think properly. They've got a real mind fog. They're feeling really depressed. A lot of stuff is because they're just not getting enough oxygen, and it is absolutely essential for brain function. So I really encourage you to take some time to know how to breathe properly. And breathing properly is full inhalation, slowing your breath down. Anything that can bring down your body in from a heightened state into a state of calm. If there was ever a superpower, it's being calm. It's a superpower in families, it's a superpower in the workplace, it's a superpower in public spaces, and it's a superpower for you. So knowing how to breathe is your ticket to calm, which is going to help you be present, release expectations, be able to deal with what's in front of you without going into any kind of collapse, and know that it's going to pass and you're going to be able to get up. And you might just find on the other side that there's some really amazing things that will come out of the adversity that you faced. There's absolutely some amazing things that are coming out of COVID and our experiences. It's transforming the workplace. Who knew 5 months ago that we would be in a workplace where people are often free to work remotely now, to work flexibly, Our teams are working really differently. The way we communicate is working really differently. Who would have thought in 5 months that could happen? But it has. So there are always gifts that come with this, and we have to be ready to be present and to look for them and enjoy them. I am going to look for and enjoy a whole lot of questions right now. Robert, what have we got?
I'm back. Look, we've got some good questions coming in. So that's really awesome, everybody. So if you've got any others, please send them through. But first one here, Polly, is from Marty. As a way of celebrating your failures, is it helpful to document your failures so that you have a reminder of these failures?
Yeah, Marty, that's an epic question. And it's really helpful to document failures because the documentation also gives you a bigger context of what it was in that moment. I would love to have a different word for failure because I think the minute we hear failure, all of us go into that one time that we did that terrible thing and felt so ashamed. And it's kind of hard to think about it. But I certainly, when I, in my work in startups and in tech companies, there's a really strong process of looking at failure, and it's done rigorously and it's done almost weekly. And it's kind of like, what happened? What happened just before? What happened afterwards? Where were all of the links? So you're almost mapping out what the ecosystem of that event was. And then no one shames or blames. Everyone owns their part. And so if you're doing this just for you, think about other people's parts. And if you're in a team, I really encourage you, Marty, to get people into a process of doing a review. So in tech world, we call them retrospectives. And so every sprint in that project management style, you would do a retrospective to look at what worked and what didn't work. And it's as simple as what does and doesn't work, not who failed and who's to blame. But the documentation of it means that when you're coming up to that again, you can be like, oh, hang on a minute. I felt like this before. We've had this situation before, and you can go back and look. But it gives you a really nice evolution of your thinking. So 100% document it. And, it is really worth celebrating because then what you'll be celebrating is that's what didn't work. What's going to work? We're going to try this now.
All right, thanks. Well, Michelle asks, what if you work in an operational area and you have to move from one job to the next? Any advice?
I'm not quite sure what the heart of that question is, Michelle. So I'm just going to answer it from my heart and think about different ways that you might be approaching that. So transitioning from one job to the next it really actually calls on quite a lot of resilience because you're having to really morph into different cultures, different roles, different activities all the time, which again is not how the human organism particularly likes to work. We like to do things that are really fixed and solid. So the best way to do that is to really understand how to be agile and flexible in the way you approach everything. This is very much about landing in a new place with really fresh eyes, with a spirit of beginner's mind. You're here. Who do you need to know? How do you connect with the people around you? What are the things that they can tell you? What are the things you can observe for yourself? And how are you feeling in your body, in your felt sense, as you're doing all of that? So I work in quite a lot of different work environments as a consultant. So I'm regularly moving from place to place to place to place and have to land, quickly understand what's happening and who I'm talking to, what kind of tone I need to be using, what kind of stuff is going to be best for them. So I think it's very much about I stay really curious. I stay really open to asking a lot of questions and getting a deep understanding of the needs of the people I'm working with. The people are really critical. It's, I understand in operations, you're dealing with a lot of different systems as well. So it's having an appetite for, again, asking questions. How do I do this? Going to the go-to people and being super vulnerable. It's the best thing because you always have that sense of being, when you're in that new person space, you can ask all the questions that people don't ask because they feel like they're stupid if they do. There's no stupid, there's only curiosity and not having an expectation, but making the connections with people and finding out how you can best adapt in that space. That's probably the best advice I can give you. I hope that answered what you were asking, and feel free to circle back through the ARA if there was more to that you wanted me to answer. Thanks, Robert. What else you got for me?
Polly, a couple of questions here around people who are in leadership positions looking for some advice. So how do you recommend we keep our teams resilient? And also, how do you recommend you release expectations when individuals claim clarity around expectations?
Okay, I might have to circle back and get that second one read again, but let's start with the first one. So how do we get our teams to be resilient, and how do we lead with resilience? Is that the heart of that one, Robert?
Yeah, it is.
So the best way to do that is to model the behavior that you want to see around you. And this is particularly important in leadership because you can't be asking your direct reports and your subordinates to be vulnerable and courageous and open and share and admit that they've made mistakes if you aren't prepared to do that as well. So the best leaders that I see are leaders who are really modeling that authentic behavior themselves, who are quite prepared to share. And that doesn't mean to overshare or to have a little sob, unless that's how you normally operate. But it means that you are able to show your vulnerability and show your humanity. I also think that in the best teams and the most functional, resilient teams I've seen, leaders really know who their people are. They individually know. Now, if you've got 100 people working underneath you, that can be more difficult. But there's ways that you can get out on the floor, walk and talk and see people and connect with them and show you want them to do what you're doing as well. That's in these COVID times, something that really requires a lot of communication, and it does require time. And so often I hear people sort of saying, but I'm so busy, how am I going to do an email or do a little video hookup or whatever it is? You just find a way, because it's important, and it will circumvent a lot of timely things to deal with when people feel that they can connect with you and be open with you. So these tools that I'm talking about, show emotion, be vulnerable, be courageous, talk to people about how they're feeling, understand what some of the issues that they're dealing with are, encourage people to bring ideas to you and to have robust discussions and get some skills around being able to have really robust discussions and difficult conversations where everyone comes out feeling held and respected and seen and heard. So all of this work is about good leadership. Resilience and building resilient cultures is about stepping out as a leader in grounded confidence, as bravely as you can, in your authenticity. And as soon as you do that, you're giving permission for your teams to do that. So to go to the question around expectations, I think there's probably some semantics in what I'm saying. So expectations in terms of what is expected in a role, in a project, in how you show up in the workplace. I would say that's really setting clear boundaries for your people. What's okay, what's not okay. People absolutely need to know that. Dropping your expectations is meaning that you are open to people being the way that they are, and that you aren't projecting onto them that they're going to do this way or that way. You're going to get them to meet the requirements, but your expectations of how that's going to happen and maybe what their response to that can be dropped, because otherwise you're pushing them into a shape that they may not be suiting. Robert, just read that question to me again, just to make sure I've fully gone down that road.
Yeah, it was, as leaders, how do you recommend you release expectations when individuals crave clarity around expectations?
And so I think that the way to do that is to set out a sort of a roadmap in terms of, depending on what it is and without more context of the question. If it's in terms of how we're going to do this particular project or be in this role, you can say, this is how we want the outcome to be. This is what we expect the outcome to be. This is how we would like you to be in this role. But things can change. And when they do, we'll be agile and we'll be flexible. So you're setting out some clear goals and guidelines and boundaries, and at the same time, you're acknowledging that we're in changeable times. And if things don't work out that way, then you have the capacity to reset, and that you have the right to reset all the time. And right now, being able to be agile and pivot constantly is a really clear thing, without feeling, I think people often feel when they pivot that they're backtracking or they said one thing but they're doing another. You're only doing that if you've set up an expectation that you're going to do things one way and this is going to be exactly what it looks like. Help people just sit in the discomfort of uncertainty by letting them know that things are going to change. But when they do, you're going to be right there leading them, and your door's going to be open, and they're going to be able to express how they feel. And if something happens that, an expectation really hasn't been met, you'll be able to have a clear conversation together about what it was that didn't happen.
Excellent. Thanks, Polly. Narelle is asking, what do you think the role of self-compassion and kindness to others plays in building collective resilience in group and communities?
Oh, Narelle, I couldn't love you more for that question, because the role of compassion is so unbelievably important. Compassion and kindness are everything. And what compassion and kindness do for us in cultures is that they don't put expectations on people. They don't set people up to fail, and they accept that everyone is dealing with their own stuff. Everyone is suffering in their own way. And that if we're coming up, say, against someone who we find to be really a difficult person, that difficult person is someone who is probably more freaked out, suffering more frightened, more anxious. And the way they're showing that, they've got their armor on and they're just trying to survive. So when we bring the spirit of compassion into our cultures, and when we reward it and when we encourage it, and when we're gentle with each other, and when we're empathetic with each other, and when we recognize emotion, that speaks to all of that stuff. We create cultures where people feel brave to be themselves. And when people are able to be themselves, they work more efficiently, they're more productive, they're more actualized, they have greater purpose and meaning, and they invest that back into their organizations. So creating cultures like that is basically creating the dream culture in every sector. There is no sector that doesn't need this. It allows people to be truthful. It allows them to be flexible. Everything about it's great. But realistically, walking through life, this is how we should deal with everyone, because everything is better when we're compassionate and kind. Thank you, Narelle. So happy with that question.
Thanks, Polly. I'll also give a bit of feedback here. A couple of people whose questions you've already answered earlier have come back and said, great response, and thank you for that. So you're right bang on there with your responses. Next question is, how do you deal with multiple roles with the organisation with no clear roadmap? Hard to focus. Any suggestions?
Oh, my first response to that is deep compassion and empathy, because it is really hard to focus and not know. My suggestion would be to get clear on the complexity, I suppose. You're dealing with a situation of complexity because there are so many competing things. It would be really worth setting those boundaries and going to the people who are creating those non-roadmaps, for want of a better word, and asking them for clarity. I mean, that's a vulnerable thing to do, because often it feels like you look like you don't know what you're doing when you do that. But I would be putting that in the context of, if you would like me to deliver on all of these things, assuming you're working in an organisation with competing responsibilities from different areas, rather than being a consultant managing a whole lot of disconnected projects, you need to bring all the people involved together to try and make them understand what the roadmap needs to look like, and that there is a need for some investment in time to get a good outcome. For me, it's always, much as I love and completely, always want to involve compassion and kindness and empathy in everything. Often the thing that gets you across the line when having those kind of conversations is being able to really clearly demonstrate that without the clarity and without them knowing what they're doing, the time and the investment is going to be wasted. There'll be a lot of shedding of funds. And then if they want to get something done efficiently and under budget or on budget, it's much better to have a roadmap. Now, often when I see those kind of projects happening, or those kind of situations happening without the clarity, it's because people don't actually know what the next piece is and they haven't thought it through, which needs to be verbalized and owned by everyone. So my response to that would be to, as best I could, try and bring together the stakeholders who I needed to talk to, and to get clarity, and where there isn't clarity, to get non-clarity on the clarity, and then be able to go back frequently to get updates. This is a communication issue as much as anything. And I feel often it's a hope from potentially senior managers that you're just going to sort all that out and come back with a solution. So come with solutions and come with suggestions, and engage everyone's curiosity to be able to get you to at least a place of agile road mapping that can be moved and updated. And I guess, again, it depends what sort of project management system you're using too. If you're using an agile methodology, works really well with lots of competing things without a known end. If you're using waterfall, much harder. So there's a few things that might be contributing to that. But from a resilience perspective, I imagine this is causing you a lot of stress, and you need to be able to say, to ask for what you need, which is, I need clarity on this because I can't do my job properly without it. So I hope that helps, and really feel you. I feel that.
Polly, we're out of time, but I'm going to squeeze in
Oh,
one
no.
question, if that's okay.
Yay.
How
Yes.
do you relate resilience when moving into retirement?
Oh, that's a really lovely question. I think it depends on how you're approaching retirement. If you're approaching retirement with fear and trepidation because you've been doing for so long that you don't know who you are without the doing, then this is a real invitation for you to be able to take stock of the goal and the horizon. And you might have had a goal on a horizon, which was to get to retirement. That's quite a goal for many of us. So when you've got the, now's a really great chance for you to recalibrate what that over the horizon goal is, where it sits with your values and purpose. Where can you create meaning in your retirement? And I mean, retirement is taking you out of a situation where you've been in a working role, you've been paid, into a place where it doesn't mean you aren't able to continue to give and to create purpose, and also to rest, and also to take some time to develop all of those tools that we've talked about today. There's no better time than to work on your breathing and work on your emotion and work on all of that than when you have time and place. But what I see more commonly is people, when they get time and space, after having been very busy for a long time, they go into panic and fear because they feel that all the things that gave them their identity previously don't exist anymore. So it's about working out who you are without your job, how you can create meaning, how you can create space, and how you can really create a lot of joy for yourself and celebrate all of the things that will come to you because you've invested so much time and energy being a citizen in the workforce, that now is the time to really celebrate what it is that you want and need. But if you're stressed because you don't know what you want and need, then there's a whole process of sitting and actually going back to those things without holding particularly tightly to any of them. But it's a good time to be curious, time and space. So congratulations in retirement.
That's right. Polly, I just wanted to say many thanks for your time today. Lots of comments have come in thanking you and for all of your information that you've provided today and your approach to the webinars. So I wanted to pass that on to you.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, everyone.
Many thanks to everybody today who's actually joined us. Thank you for giving up your time to be with us. A short feedback survey will be circulated after this, which I encourage you to respond to. Keep an eye on our website and our social media for more information on our upcoming presentations, and stay safe, everybody, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.